Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 470 of the Juicebox Podcast. Today, we're adding to the Diabetes Pro Tip series with an episode that has been asked for by listeners forever. And for that reason and many others, I'm very excited to give it to you today. The Diabetes Pro Tip series from the Juicebox Podcast began almost 2 years ago now, when I decided to take the tools that were being spoken about in the podcast and condense each one into its own episode. That was my original thought anyway. The Pro Tip series has become so popular that, well, it's just, it's like watching a baby grow up and you just kind of go like, oh my God, look, they're doing it. It's become more than I expected. And it continues to grow. And today is another link in that chain. Diabetes Pro Tip, weight loss with type 1 diabetes. Please remember while you're listening that nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Always consult a physician before making any changes to your healthcare plan or becoming bold with insulin. In just a second, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Jenny, a little bit about the sponsors, and where you can find those other Diabetes Pro Tip episodes, and then we're going to jump right in. This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by the Omnipod tubeless insulin pump, and you may be eligible for a free 30-day trial of the Omnipod Dash right now, and you can find out if that's so at omnipod.com/juicebox. Get started today with the Dexcom G6 continuous glucose monitor at dexcom.com/juicebox. And if you're looking for those Diabetes Pro Tip episodes, you'd like to start from the beginning, they start at episode 210 with an episode called Diabetes Pro Tip, Newly Diagnosed or Starting Over. It is a series, it's made to be listened to in order, and it's of course, available to you as a subscriber to the podcast. All you have to do is go back in that podcast player to episode 210, and there it is. If you're having trouble finding the other episodes, you can look at juiceboxpodcast.com. There's a tab at the top that says Diabetes Pro Tip. Or if you don't want to go to all that trouble, go to diabetesprotip.com, where you will find the Pro Tip episodes and the Defining Diabetes episodes, which I also am very fond of. In just a moment, Jenny and I are going to get started, but first I want you to know that Jenny Smith has been living with type 1 diabetes since she was a child. She holds a bachelor's degree in human nutrition and biology from the University of Wisconsin. She's a registered and licensed dietitian, a certified diabetes educator, and a certified trainer on most makes and models of insulin pumps and continuous glucose monitors. Jenny happens to be the bomb diggity. I love her. And in a couple of weeks, her 33rd diaversary is coming up. So if you're in the private Facebook group for the podcast, please take a minute to go to the thread celebrating Jenny and leave her a little message. And I'll be passing those messages on to her on her diaversary. Last thing, I want to thank the listeners who sent in questions for this episode specifically. We get to them about 2/3 of the way into the episode. But first, Jenny and I are going to talk about ways to lose weight when you have type 1 diabetes. Every time I think there's nothing more to do for the pro tips, then somebody asks something and I think, no, that would work there too. And I'm glad.
There is the variables in life that I think will always bring in something to discuss in terms of what it could be in diabetes, like management.
Yeah, no, I'm really happy. I'm really happy to hear from people because I think that others' perspectives can make me go, oh yeah, wow, just because that hasn't happened here doesn't mean that's not happening somewhere. And then it gives, good focus for what to do. So this is it. We're going to talk about trying to lose weight when you have type 1.
As I mentioned, I think I texted back to you. I was like, this is a big topic. Mm-hmm. It's not just like 5 minutes of, well, just go out and start running. I mean, it's kind of like a rabbit hole, honestly.
All right.
I mean, there are many different little avenues to kind of talk about. And you had a lot of really good questions that came in, or comments about, gosh, I don't understand this, or why isn't this quite right, or whatever. So Yes.
We can get
It's a
started.
great topic.
So I'm going to have very little to say here, probably, and I apologize for that. I guess this is the time we pretend like I just came on your Zoom and I'm like, hey, can you help me? And then you just talk. But what's I mean, where do you think we should start? Because to me, I think we should start at the idea that people correlate taking insulin with gaining weight, and they don't think about calories and that.
Right.
Go. Hi, Jenny.
Go.
Can you help me, please?
Yeah. Well, maybe. I don't know. I know it's a good place to start in terms of like one thing that everybody with diabetes specifically thinks about is that it's insulin. And I think a good place to even go with why does that start is it's often something that a practitioner will tell people. Mm-hmm. Using insulin, you may be likely to gain weight. And I think that was one or a couple of like the comments that came back about this topic were specific to, why have I been told that I'm going to gain weight, or why is this going to happen? Or why did I lose weight? And now I'm gaining all of this weight back, like after diagnosis, right? So insulin itself, whether your body makes it or you take it with an injection or with a pump, it's a storage hormone. Right. That's its job. It's supposed to move a certain quantity of carb or sugar really out of your bloodstream and into places to either be used or stored, right? So in terms of management, insulin can make you gain weight. In terms of like initial diagnosis, a lot of people, type 1 specific, have lost weight prior to diagnosis. Maybe it was very rapid, or maybe it was like a lingering loss that people were like, well, I could just keep eating the whole cake and gosh, I don't gain any weight and I'm actually losing weight. And then they're like, wait, this is wrong. This is bad. This shouldn't be happening, right? So they go to the doctor, right? They get a diagnosis of diabetes. They've lost weight. And in terms of that loss, it's usually relative to the fact that their blood sugars have been so high that their body isn't storing those calories, right? So you're essentially peeing them out, thus DKA and all of those things that can come about, around diagnosis time. But because you're losing all those calories and your body's not packing them in, once you have back the piece of the puzzle that was supposed to help you use that food that you were taking in, your body's going to start storing it.
Right. And that is the one confusion you see from newly diagnosed people. It's like, I don't understand. I lost all this weight, and they don't understand the function of it. So explaining the function of it, I think, is great. I think boiling it down into one simple idea is that you were dying and and your body is using itself up and not storing at the same time, trying to stay alive. And then all of a sudden everything's okay.
Correct.
Now, the more weight, listen, if I'm talking out of school here, you'll stop me. But if you've lost a lot of weight before you get to the skinny, emaciated, those are my ribs, you probably had weight to lose to begin with, right? Because it was there to lose.
Likely. And especially more as the adults who are diagnosed. Yes. Right. If you had weight to lose for whatever reason, you may have just thought, like I said, oh, good. I'm actually able to take weight off now. I don't know why. I'm still doing the same 3-mile walk every day. And now it seems to be working better. Great. But yeah, once you get to that, like, I shouldn't be able to see my lower ribs, or gosh, my face looks really sunken in when I look at old pictures of myself. That's not what you want.
And I think that, again, this probably sounds, I don't want it to sound like distasteful, but if you had weight to lose, you were probably, it's likely that you were taking in calories that helped you stay at that weight, meaning that when you start taking the insulin back in, there are calories there to be packed away to facilitate the weight gain again.
And that's in any case, whether you could have lost weight, and successfully, hopefully helpful, left it off.
Right.
But the goal with starting insulin is, in general, to maintain a healthy weight then, right? To get, yes, you will come back from the weight loss, but you should also, with the proper insulin dosing, you should be able to get back to a stable, healthy weight. If you lost 40 pounds when you were diagnosed, and hey, 20 of that you could have definitely lost, and the other 20 you really didn't need to, great. We should gain back maybe 15 to 20 pounds, and then we don't need the other kind back.
Well, what is the functionality of the proper insulin dosing that makes you gain too much or not enough?
In terms of insulin dosing, that's correct. The amount of food you put in to work with it, of course, is a piece of the puzzle there. But if your insulin is being balanced along with your use of the energy that it's working with, then you should be able to gain energy back to your body that gets stored, that keeps you at a healthy weight. And you shouldn't then continue to gain if the dosing is correct. And so it kind of goes back to, on a baseline, initially make sure your insulin doses are right for you. And a lot of people wonder, I just leave it to my doctor.
Yeah.
It tells me how much more or less to take.
And does that mean that if you're not using enough insulin, that your blood sugars are left higher? So you're still having some of the action that you noticed before you were diagnosed, right?
Yes.
You're too high and your body's not storing the calories correctly, the glucose correctly. And so you're not gaining as much weight. So you could have unhealthy blood sugars, but feel like your weight's good. And then you kind of come to that point, you're like, oh, I'm good. And that really is the beginning idea of diabulimia too, right? It's manipulating the insulin to keep your weight down. Okay. So
it is.
Going the other way, if you were too low all the time, you'd have trouble putting on weight?
If you're too low all the time, that's actually kind of it's an opposite of what you would think.
Really?
If you're low all the time, and that's a big reason, then when we start working with somebody, we analyze insulin to begin with. And the first thing we look for, even if there are high highs, we first look for lows.
Okay.
Because if weight management is another piece that they're really concerned about, then all of those lows that you're treating, you are feeding insulin. And you're feeding insulin, which ends up packing away the excess that you're taking in, and you maintain a weight that you don't want, or you keep gaining weight that you don't want.
So this puts you in the position of having to look at carbohydrates as medicine and being scared because you're low, taking way more than you need, and then suddenly you're bounced back up again. And maybe you've got enough insulin in there to handle the carbs for your blood sugar, but you've taken in way more calories than your body wants. Got it. Okay.
Yeah. Yep. So that insulin it's kind of the key place to start, really.
Okay.
And, and then a lot of people ask, well, how much insulin should I really be on? How is this enough for me? Is that enough for me? I know we just talked about that kind of in depth in another episode, but really, figuring out about how much insulin you need based on a weight to begin with, that's kind of a starting place that you could go to. How much total daily insulin are you using right now? What's your current body weight, et cetera? Should you be using this much insulin? Is it taking this much more insulin to counter things? Or are you using a heck of a lot more, let's call it bolus insulin, right? But you see that your bolus insulin is for a lot of corrections. And when you're looking at your data, you can see that the corrections are following lows. There again, more insulin than you really need. And thus your body is going to pack away by allowing the insulin to use up the food.
It's funny because I wasn't 100% sure what you were going to say today. And yet I feel like we're into this situation again where the podcast should maybe be 3 minutes long and it should say, limit your variability, use the right amount of insulin. And it kind of addresses so many things. I know this isn't weight loss specific, but let me just ask you one question. How many people, what percentage of people do you think, just a guess, are getting to reasonable outcomes by mistake? Like they're bolusing too much, but they're eating on time and their basal's too low and it works out, or their basal's too high and they eat before they get low and they don't have to bolus too much. And how many people are getting there the wrong way, but it seems like it's working, and then have underlying issues that they don't recognize? I
wouldn't say it's anywhere near a majority of people. Okay. Honestly, I'd say it's a small percentage of people who have figured out insulin needs, even though the dosing strategy that they're using might be wrong, like you said, maybe there's way too little basal, but they're offsetting it with boluses, and maybe the little amount of basal they're using is right for their overnights, and that's why it looks stable, or, vice versa, whatever. But I don't think that's the majority of people. I think the majority of people who are having issues with blood sugar fluctuations that they don't want, and also likely are having some issues with weight management of some type, it's a start of, let's look at what the initial factor could be, insulin.
Okay.
And then you move on further, and, lifestyle is a big part of it, obviously.
Right.
So then we look at things like calorie intake. And I think some of the questions that came in were kind of, around that. Well, I've run a calorie deficit, and I've run myself ragged going to the gym, or, exercising 90 hours a week or whatever, and it's still not working.
Mm-hmm.
But and then, there's the fasting component and all of these things that people try to put into the picture.
Mm-hmm.
But from the standpoint of calorie, your calorie needs should meet your baseline kind of need in general. And then if you're working out on top of that, or, a training athlete or whatnot, then calorie needs go up. But at a minimum, there is kind of a minimum on average that needs to be there. It's about 1,000 calories a day, give or take, person to person. But when you start dipping below that, oftentimes what ends up happening is your body conserves.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're not meeting a need.
Right.
And then you wonder, well, I'm at a deficit. Why am I not losing?
Because your body thinks you're lost on a desert island, and it doesn't. It's trying to hold on to everything you put inside it.
Exactly.
I've had that problem where by eating more food, I've lost weight, and eating less, it didn't impact me as a fact. In fact, it sort of made me go the wrong way. So, okay. So if someone asks you, is it not as simple as, hey, I need to lose weight, can you tell me where to start? Is it really person to person? Because what do you have to do first? Like think about if you were listening to this right now, and you could be any of the varied people who are listening, where do people start?
I would definitely say first might even be an analysis of where are you and where do you want to be, or where have you been weight wise, right?
Okay.
What's your goal to get to, and how much more are you above that than you want to be? And also in that time frame, it goes back to insulin analysis. If you've gained weight, as many people have in this past year, if you have gained weight, but your insulin doses haven't really shifted, therein lies a piece of the puzzle too, right? Usually for about a 10% change to your baseline weight, you're probably going to expect a need to change your basal and your bolus ratios by about 10% as well, to be more aggressive and to take into consideration that gain. Now, when people are looking for loss, they're like, yeah, but I don't want to use more insulin because that's not going to work.
And they think insulin put the weight on them.
Correct.
Okay. Gotcha.
But really they need to first manage their blood sugars.
Right.
And then they can start working on whittling away or whittling back. And some of that comes into, okay, let's look at the lifestyle things. Okay. Let's look at, are you exercising or are you active enough? Does your calorie intake meet what your actual need is? Where can we whittle away some things so that weight comes down? And along with it then, as you do lose, the same thing happens with insulin. Mm-hmm. Your insulin doses should be adjusted back based on loss.
You are making me think so strongly about when somebody comes to me and says, hey, I just got diabetes and I play a sport, or my kid, is on the team and we're so worried about this. And I very badly don't want to give them a Band-Aid answer about how to get through the sport. I want to tell them, let's take the time now and get your insulin right so that during the activity, there really isn't any issue. Right. And it's hard for people to believe that once they've seen it. Once they see cause and effect, once they see I ran around and my blood sugar went down, they imagine that is going to happen no matter what all of the time. And Arden's, I'm sure you're the same way, but Arden's insulin's so well balanced at this point. Activity doesn't make her lower or higher, really. It doesn't really change too much.
Yeah, and I think that brings in, the consistency of exercise or activity, right? The more attuned your body is, let's say you go out for an hour every single day to get some form of real exercise, right? Your body gets used to that. So initially you might see that your insulin needs drop off within the hours of the active time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe even stretching several hours later, depending on what you did. But over time, that impact is lessened. You will usually need to be less aggressive with insulin adjustment, or maybe not at all. I mean, I can typically take my kids to the park and not really worry too much about that unless I know I'm really going to run around crazy with them. And I likely have insulin on board.
Right.
So then something needs to be, offset. But, so yeah, I mean, once you get to the point of like lifestyle adjustments and a base insulin that's working, your fluxes in insulin dose then will be minimized.
You also have to,
go ahead.
I was going to say, I think people need to be certain too that once they start exercising, their body is going to use the insulin better. The answer then is not to feed the low, it's to adjust the insulin. And,
correct.
Maybe the first time you have to feed it, but then you have to learn from there and make an adjustment so that you're not constantly battling yourself. Because that is what happens, right? They exercise, they get low, they eat. It overpowers what they meant to accomplish. Okay.
And then you end up getting frustrated too. Well, goodness, I go to the gym, but I have to eat like a whole sandwich and a half a banana in order to go to the gym and not have a low blood sugar. What's the purpose of that when I'm trying to lose weight?
And then I stopped doing it
and they stop doing it. Right. Or on the other side of it, someone who may actually, okay, I'm going to really focus in on my diet. I'm going to clean it up. I'm going to, cut my macros down and actually meet the caloric need that I'm at right now.
Mm-hmm.
And then what they end up with many times are lows, especially the cleaner the diet gets and the more accurate intake of calorie value is for that person, your insulin needs will actually come down sooner. Yeah. So to avoid lows and needing to treat in the time period where you're really trying to be good, let's say, just take your insulin doses down by maybe even it's just your basal, take it down by maybe 5 to 10% across the board.
Okay. So it's get your insulin right. So it's understand diabetes first.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's the normal stuff we all talk about. It's being active, getting your heart rate up. A sedentary lifestyle leads to more resistant blood sugars, which leads to more insulin, which probably leads to more lows because you get out of balance blood sugars. And what you just said about clean eating, we don't really talk about it. Like if we were all out in a field, okay, let's just say this. If it was 400 years ago and somehow insulin existed, but we were still just farming and breakfast might be an apple you found on the ground, and maybe on Wednesday, if you're lucky, the guy up the street kills an elk and we get a steak, right? Like if we were still eating like that and we had man-made insulin, people would not be using nearly as much insulin as they use now. Jenny just
goodness.
Is like,
oh no, not at all. I mean, if you were living on like berries that you picked along the trail that you were tracking the elk on, and then you stopped and you ate some of the watercress, get your vitamin C out of the like stream that floated by or whatever. No.
You might not need as much insulin, right?
So, no, you wouldn't. You're also active level that, most like, let's call them, cave dwellers or whatever at that point of life, right? Activity was part of your day. They didn't have a gym that they went to.
Yeah, moving.
Their hunt for the bison, man, was like activity.
I bet you running from a mountain lion burns carbs. What do you think? What do you think?
Betcha it does. Exactly. Yes.
So I guess my point is that while I'm not telling anybody how to eat, and I'm not certainly telling you that my daughter's counting macros or anything like that, processed foods, right? Man-made foods, stuff that comes in bags, oils that don't belong in your body, all the stuff that we consume all the time that we're not aware of, it's making your variability greater, and it's making it more difficult for you to use insulin.
True. In fact, I've also kind of heard people, and there's truth to it.
Hey, let's not waste any time, shall we? Isn't it nice how I said, let's not waste any time? It took me 10 seconds to say, let's not waste any time. Then I went over it for 10 more seconds. I better jump in. Get yourself a Dexcom G6 continuous glucose monitor. Why? You'll be able to see trends, directions, impacts of insulin on blood sugars, impacts of food on blood sugars, the impacts of life on type 1 diabetes. You'll see it all with your Dexcom G6 continuous glucose monitor. And how does it do that? Well, it shows you your blood sugar in real time, not just the number, but the speed and direction of your blood sugar. Are you 184 and dropping, or rising, or stable? That's a big deal, isn't it? Because in each of those three situations, you might do something different. A rising blood sugar might get some insulin. A falling blood sugar might warrant you paying attention to it. And say it's super stable right where you want it, you know you've done the right thing. The Dexcom G6 gives that feedback in real time in ways that is so usable. You hear us talk about it all the time on the podcast. So check it out. Dexcom.com/juicebox. Sure, there's alarms you can set. Those are a big deal too. You can say, I'd like to know if I'm going below 80 or if I'm going above 140, and it'll tell you. Don't want to know till you're 160? You can change that. That's up to you. The Dexcom G6 is a vital tool if you're using insulin. I'm talking about type 1 or type 2. Check it out. Support the podcast when you do. Use the links in your show notes or type in dexcom.com/juicebox. After that, you're going to want an insulin pump, right? Maybe you don't have one and you want one. I say check out the Omnipod. You have a different pump and you're a little sick of the tubing, I say check out the Omnipod. You're using MDI, giving yourself the shots, and you're kind of sick of it, you know what I say? Check out the Omnipod. Do that at omnipod.com/juicebox. You have two options when you get there. You can see if you're eligible for a free 30-day trial of the Omnipod Dash system, and I mean 30 days is like a long time, and it's free. Or ask for a free, no-obligation demo pod, where Omnipod will just send you out one non-working pod so you can try it on and see what you think. There's a lot of options when you get to that link. All of them are going to give you more information and help you make a good decision. Omnipod.com/juicebox. Use an insulin pump that doesn't have tubing, that doesn't need to be taken off when you shower or run or kick a ball. An insulin pump that doesn't have something on it, a long tube from an infusion set back to a controller that can get caught on a doorknob or just kind of be a pain to carry around. Wouldn't you like to carry nothing? Just have that little pod on that talks wirelessly to a device where you give yourself insulin, not something that's tethered to you with tubing full of insulin? And hey, if you don't want an Omnipod, whatever. Do the trial. Say you don't like it. Don't like it. Nobody's holding you up. You can do whatever you want, but at least then you'll have real data to make decisions with. And as you know, I think data is very important. Okay, that's it. Omnipod.com/juicebox, Dexcom.com/juicebox. Links in the show notes, links at juiceboxpodcast.com. And again, if you're looking for these diabetes pro tip episodes and you can't find them, they start at episode 210 in your podcast player, or they're available at diabetesprotip.com and juiceboxpodcast.com.
Many people have found that if they eat a true carb, let's say they eat an apple and they bolus for it, they end up with the ratio that they're using for that simple, like very clean carb to go low.
Okay.
And then when they mix it up and let's say they have potato chips or something along with the apple, or they have something, more processed along with it, their carb count ends up looking clean. Like, okay, it comes out, I don't get low later, so what gives? It really is that the body processes more natural food in a better way.
Right.
There's less left over to kind of linger in impact. And a lot of people are basing their insulin to carb ratios more specifically around combination meals that are not quite as, for lack of a better term, clean.
Right. So your heavier insulin ratios work better if you have the orange with the potato chips. But if you just eat the orange doesn't need as much insulin, so the ratios you have are too heavy.
Correct.
Yeah. Now Arden's ratios are heavier because she doesn't, she eats a diet that has processed foods mixed into it. But she'll go on a kick around this time of year about oranges, where I have to buy like 10-pound bags of oranges to keep around the house. And she's like, I want an orange. Now, these are big, like softball size oranges that I'm sure.
Are they the Cara oranges? Those are my favorite.
Yeah, I think they are. And they're really good, right? But I bet you, and I've never looked, but I bet you that the carb count on them's got to be more like 25 or something like that. Like,
they're huge.
It could be more, right? But I only give her enough insulin for like 11 carbs. And she does a little 130 rise and comes back again because because I know her ratio is higher to handle other things, which is why you look at plates and go, okay, tonight I don't need as much, for that. Right. But this is not going to be a satisfying. People just want to hear like, please just tell me what to do and I'll do it and this will work. But nobody wants to hear, I guess this. I know I don't. Like, you know what I mean? I don't have diabetes. And as I'm listening, I was like, oh, this is how I would lose weight too, huh? It's just, do you think that we've just spent so much time as a society looking for marketable, sellable ideas about how to get around the idea of being in shape? There's it's exercise and calories, right?
And I think that's the reason that there are so many. I mean, if you look at around the first of the year, I can't remember which publication it is, but they come out with an analysis of, I think, like the top most, or maybe it's the 25 top most like used, call them diets, right, in the past year, and what's kind of proven true to what it promotes and what really isn't. It's kind of like flimsy, right? And some of the top ones are things like the Mediterranean diet. And, by no means am I promoting that or whatever. I'm just saying that ends up being top from a lot of different health parameters. And it's also a clean way of eating. Yeah. Most people think Mediterranean and they think, well, lots of breads and lots of starchy things. And that's actually not true. A lot of it is plants, especially the really good non-starchy vegetable types of plants. Right. And then if there are grains, they're the heartier grains, right? It doesn't tell you to eat your carbs as a bag of Doritos. It tells you to go and eat some quinoa on your salad with, an orange on the side, right? But I think it brings in diets.
Yeah.
This idea that there is the perfect thing out there.
Right. And that it's going to be doable for somebody, because maybe macro counting, maybe there's a biologist somewhere that could give you the perfect diet for your body, but where am I getting that from? And where are most people getting that? I have to tell you that a couple of weeks ago, I started getting achy, right? And then I looked in the mirror and I was like, my face looks puffy. And I went to the Costco and I bought 2 little roaster chickens and 4 steaks. I smoked them all, slice them up, put them in the refrigerator, and I've been eating those and salads and some of those oranges because they're around the house.
And they're really good.
Yeah, for about the past 8 or 9 days, I'm easily 10 pounds lighter than I was. And I know I'm a fluctuating person. Like, I know I jump around. Like, because what'll happen is at some point, someone's going to give me a piece of bread. And I'm going to be like, oh my God, bread. Does everyone remember bread? And then, I'm going to eat a lot of bread for a week. And then I'm going to go, oh, now my back's stiff and I feel like I gained 5 pounds and all that stuff. But just if I explain to you that most of my meals have been like a couple of eggs in the morning and a couple of tiny slices off of that steak, and then at lunch some of the chicken and some of the steak with a salad, and I feel great, and I know it's true, like, because I've been through it enough now to talk my stupid childish inside into like just continuing on that way. That I don't know if I'm ever going to get to do, but I do know it's honest and it works for me, and I've seen it work for other people too. Like, you take out processed food and carbs, and you're better off. Like, I don't know, it just seems obvious, but
and it's like you said, you're not focusing on like macros. You're not focusing on how many do I need in a day. What we end up finding, and I think this is the premise behind a lot of the paleo kind of diet and the keto type of diet, right? It's if you're following the rules of those plans pretty well, they can be very clean eating plans.
Yeah.
They can. There can also, just like being vegetarian can be, or vegan can be, very healthy way of eating. But there are also like the complete like backside of that, where you're eating a lot of processed vegan, or like the keto like kinds of things that are like the treats and whatnot. Yeah. If you're focusing your intake on a lot of that kind of stuff, you're lacking in quality. And then your macros may very well, without you realizing it, be completely out of order. And I think that's why a lot of like plans like this end up failing. You know, I've followed keto, and it was supposed to be this magic like weight loss. And I also have diabetes, and it was really supposed to help with my blood sugar management and whatnot. Well, I haven't lost any weight. Well, maybe there are some things then to evaluate within it. You know, the keto diet is a way to get your body to start utilizing fat instead of carbs. So if you haven't really analyzed how you've broken that down to make sure that you are, one, maintaining ketosis in the right way, and that the kinds of like carbs that you're eating are really not offsetting, then it may not work well for you.
Don't you find that you have to be in tune with what satisfies your body? Like not what satisfies your brain, right? But what satisfies your body. And I've seen myself go either way, like where you're just eating for taste and flavor and comfort, and that's never usually good for your body. And then there's a way where you're just sort of never hungry. It's that's where I am this week. I have not been hungry this week. And if I have had any like inkling towards a sweet, I've been specifically careful to take just like dark chocolate, like just a little bit of dark chocolate. It's like, this'll get me through, like with what I'm assuming is basically withdrawals from flour and sugar and stuff like that, you know? So I don't know, like, are you telling me that all these questions aren't even worth looking at, or should we ask them?
No, I think they're very worth looking at, because I think some of them may relate to what we've kind of already gotten into. And then some of them I think are really good questions in terms of the why it wouldn't be working. Okay. Right.
Let's do it.
Or why it might actually work. So yeah, let's take a look.
Do you have a favorite, or should I just pick?
You just pick.
All right. Well, so Jennifer's asking about her son. She says, any advice on how to balance all this high carb, gluten-free food for my growing, always hungry 14-year-old T1D with celiac? So she has a son who seems to need slimming down, and at the same time, she's giving him a lot of carb heavy stuff because it's like some of this for the celiac diet, it seems like, right? The gluten stuff.
Right. Yeah. And that's, I mean, celiac is a hard addition. It definitely is, because while we now have a plethora of gluten-free, very tasty products on the market, most of them are made with very, very processed, very high glycemic. I mean, higher glycemic than even your wheat-based bread, type of pasta, whatever it might be. Yeah. So when you start processing things like rice into a flour or, potato into a flour, you have a quicker digestive component to that, and it raises the blood sugar faster. Its glycemic index is just high comparatively. So when you have to do these types of things, especially if you have a teen who is growing, is active, but also could maybe use some slimming down, or maybe needs to gain a bit of weight, one, it's maybe sitting down honestly with a dietitian. Right. To see, what are my child's growing nutrition needs right now? Are we, keeping kind of a log a couple of days of what are they really intaking? And then looking at what their nutrition needs should be for the point in life where they are. Are they moderately active? Are they heavily active? Are they kind of couch potato video gamers? What is it? And what do they need? And then looking at the kind of food that you put into their caloric need. Right. Again, I mean, parents are typically the purchasers of the food in the house. Yeah. Give or take.
You don't think this 14-year-old's got a credit card?
Yeah. No. I mean, and my kids, gosh, I mean, if we walk down the aisles in a grocery store and they see like the pretty packages and, like we don't eat cereal, so I don't go down the cereal aisle, but they'll always have something on like an end cap, at the grocery. And
and you're like,
especially my 8-year-old, you'd be like, boy, that looks really good, Mom. I'm like, yeah. And it's not really good for your body. So,
that's why they have to make the picture so nice.
My poor kids, right?
And he's like, there's no fun here. Stop it. Well,
so I think, from that standpoint, you have to look at what is the child in need of. Are you meeting it? Are you creating excess? And then potentially from a gluten-free standpoint, finding substitutions that can be fit in to meet his tastes. Because all kids and teens are different, as much as you want them to eat asparagus, they might not.
Yeah.
So,
Right. So you have to be, listen, I know if you've been listening for a while, you know that it took me a while to diagnose my low iron thing years ago. And during that, a doctor made me eat like gluten-free for a month. And I gained a lot of weight because I went out and bought all these gluten-free items. And somehow in my mind, I was like, gluten-free equals health. That's how it felt to me. So I was like, oh, it felt like 0-calorie stuff when I was going in, and man, it was just not. I think if this was me, if Jennifer was me, and I didn't know what I was doing, I think I'd introduce like lower carb, more meat friendly like meals. Like that's what would occur to me first, right? Make some chicken, make some steak, put it with a salad or a vegetable, and maybe cut down on carbs. But then you got to remember, like we spoke about earlier, not to dose it as harshly as you would some of this gluten-free stuff, or you're just going to create a low and you're going to
then have
ruin
more
what you did with the meat.
Right.
Okay.
And I think, when we look at, going back to just that like clean eating idea, quite honestly, you can be gluten-free if you're choosing to not buy as much processed food pretty easily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, things like quinoa or like a wild rice or even like a brown rice or that's 100% gluten-free.
Yeah. It's the fun stuff where it causes you a problem.
Right. It's not taking it out of the diet. It's just that, and I know the struggle with kids. I work with plenty of kids and teens to know that what they get at home under mom and dad influence, because this is what you're eating, turns around and it changes considerably once they start to do things with their friends, Now, gluten-free in the picture, if the child is paying attention to that and knows that they just can't have gluten, they may already then have limitations even compared to what their friends are eating because they know that they just can't do it or they're not going to feel good, right? But in that circumstance, then it kind of takes sitting down and figuring out, well, what will possibly be there that you could have, knowing that it's still more of like a processed treaty kind of thing, but also that, we're not going to do this at home, but you could have it when you're out.
Right. Okay. Laura has a question. It says, is it true that insulin on board prevents the body from breaking down fat, meaning that in order to burn fat, you need to have stretches of time with only your basal insulin and no insulin on board? That's interesting. I've never heard that.
Yeah, it is. I guess it's an interesting way to frame it. I mean, we know that in the overnight time period, without any food on board and on basal only, our body does get into more of that like fasting state, right? Of actually transitioning to some fat burn, et cetera, because you're on a low level of insulin.
I see what she's saying. Okay.
But when you have insulin on board, technically there's a reason for the insulin on board.
Right.
Right? Sure. You're dosing for food. So that insulin on board should be covering food that is there. So yes, your body's processing carbohydrates and your body is not at that point then going to be in fat burn mode. It's kind of correct in a way of stating it. Yes. I mean, the same thing for a high blood sugar that you've corrected. Now you've got IOB and the high blood sugar indicates that there's excessive sugar there and your body needs to process it. And as such, it's using the insulin to process it and break it down and get it in the right places. So again, technically, as long as there's not an insulin deficit in that high blood sugar scenario, and the insulin is working to get it down, then your body isn't also breaking down fats either.
Then is that a vote for intermittent fasting for type 1s?
It could be. And can intermittent fasting work?
Right.
It can. But again, a blanket statement is to say that any plan that you choose, no long term that you can continue this.
Right.
The problem with the diets that are out there isn't the diet itself. In fact, there's a lot of research around a lot of the diets that proves long term, these people have had this success in weight management and cardiovascular benefit, et cetera, but they've stuck with it.
Yeah.
It is I'm going to do intermittent fasting. I'm going to do the keto diet. I'm going to do the, cabbage soup diet for the next month. And once it starts kind of showing benefit,
I'm having
then
a Twinkie.
You're like, I can kind of step outside of the rules, the parameters, which are often for diets, very black and white.
Yes.
Do this, this, and this, but don't do this. And as soon as you do the don't do this, you've broken the piece of that plan that was getting you to your goal.
Right. I found intermittent fasting the easiest to stick with, because to me what it was as long as I don't eat after 8 and don't eat before noon. That is basically how I did it. And I have to admit, it's very effective. Now, I realized while I was doing it that Arden basically does that already without the late night thing. But she's so young, I don't think it matters, right? But she gets up in the morning and is not normally hungry in the morning. And so I've had to, over time, thoughtfully balance out how her insulin works in the morning, right? How do I come out of sleep, into feet on the floor, off to school without a rise that needs a bunch of insulin so that I don't create a low, because she really doesn't want to eat until she's done with school or till lunchtime, right?
Sure.
So basically, Arden does intermittent fast, except she doesn't do 16. Is it 16? Wait, 18, 19, 20. Yeah, 16-8. That was embarrassing.
Like I have to think again.
A lot of people would edit that out, but I'm not going to. She doesn't do 16-8 in as much as she probably does like maybe 14-10, something like that. But also she's 16, so she can, she can, like, we over bolused her meal last night for dinner. We had stuffed peppers, like turkey stuffed peppers, and a salad. And my wife like swung at it really hard. And about a half hour after she ate, I was like, hey, her blood sugar is like stuck at 70. I was like, this doesn't look okay to me. Like, I think this is going to go the wrong way, And so as it started to trend away, Arden got a little light in her eye and she goes, cinnamon toast crunch, please. And so she knew she had basically pre-bolus cereal. So she was like, let's do it. And she had some of that. Had my wife gone, I'm going to guess 10 or 15 carbs less on the bolus, she hit it right on. She was so close.
Yeah.
But that's a young kid. And Arden's also helped by other things that I think are worth mentioning here too. Because those of you listening have type 1 diabetes or love somebody who does, you really have to get your thyroid levels checked. Yeah. Like, you could be fighting against a borderline thyroid problem that's making weight loss impossible.
Correct.
And if you're going to do that, you really need to go back and listen to the thyroid episode with Dr. Benito, because the range that your doctor is going to say your thyroid, your TSH level is okay in, a real badass endocrinologist will not accept. You know what I mean? They will not, like, if you're over a 2, Dr. Benito's giving you thyroid hormone. Like, and there are people right now who are listening who are like, oh, my TSH is a 5. My doctor said it's okay. I'm borderline.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. But my hair does fall out a little bit, or I'm having trouble losing weight, or I'm a little nasty sometimes, or whatever the other things come. Right. I'm just telling you, if your thyroid's moving the wrong way, deal with it, because it makes a lot of life easier.
And it's a lot within this whole topic of weight management. Absolutely. I mean, if you have the Hashimoto's, which is very common, autoimmune, once you've got, type 1, it's good to get tested thyroid levels at least once a year, if not every 6 months, especially if you've got other family who has a thyroid disorder known already. But that's huge in terms of metabolic
Yeah, but you have to advocate for yourself. You can't say, "Oh my God, Scott, you're right. I am tired all the time and I can't lose weight and blah blah blah," and then go to the doctor and the doctor say, "Oh, your TSH is 4, you're fine. Your TSH is 4, you are not fine." That's the equivalent. That to me is the thyroid equivalent of in diabetes when somebody says, "Oh, your average blood sugar is 180, you're doing great." Right. You might, you're not dying, but you're not living at a healthy level, and that has other impacts on your life. This thyroid thing is crazy. It is like the equivalent. You trust me, at this point, I've seen everyone in my family except for me deal with it. It's like taking a long metal like paper clip and just touching it on a computer circuit board. It just messes with stuff. You know what I mean? Yeah. It doesn't shut you off, but
and with Arden's doses, have you noticed that when things get out of order, do you notice a shift in her insulin need? Because that's very common.
Right away.
That, metabolically, she's feeling more sluggish and fatigued, and insulin is just not working like it was supposed to work. And there's a time frame in terms of adjustment or even just starting on a thyroid medication where you will then start to notice a shift back to normal insulin dosing. So again, that insulin manipulation in terms of the weight management piece with thyroid in the picture, you have to be very kind of eyes on,
right,
to make sure that you're adjusting then where you had bumped everything up in terms of insulin need. You're going to need to start bumping down. And if there's weight loss in the picture at the same time, definite need to bump down, or you're going to just run lows.
Yeah. There's sometimes I think I should even have a flow chart for myself. Like if this, then that kind of chart, because you're right. If the thyroid level starts to get away, then her insulin needs go up, and then we adjust it. It doesn't happen right away, and her insulin needs start coming back down again. The same thing with, she had to start a birth control pill to regulate her periods. I lost 3 months of my life to figuring that out. Like it was just, first they gave her a pill with not enough estrogen in it. So it was basically just 2 wasted months. She was exhausted all the time because she was bleeding constantly. Yeah. So I had to get her through those pills. Those aren't the right pills. Put her on the right pill. That started working. The bleeding regulated. Yay. Now she's lost so much blood. I had to go get her an iron infusion. Got her the iron infusion. Now we're waiting for that to come back up. When the iron infusion comes on board, her insulin needs are going to change again.
Yeah.
Vitamin D levels seem to impact insulin needs.
Yes. In fact, many people for vitamin D that you bring it up, that's another like piece. And I think in terms of like again, going down the rabbit hole of discussion and weight management, we're kind of on the track of like medications and medications in terms of thyroid, as well as things like iron, but vitamin D, your lab will tell you optimal is between, or standard is 30 to 100. Optimal, according to the female specific physician that I'd worked with years ago before I had my first son, she was like, optimal range is really 50 to 70 for vitamin D.
Okay.
She's like, and if it is not in there, you need to be being supplemented, because otherwise, especially with diabetes, vitamin D works on the cellular level and it allows insulin to be seen correctly, for lack of a better term, by the cells. Right. And so it lets insulin actually work the way that it's meant to, of one of the many things that can. So if your vitamin D level is off, supplement. I mean, in general, someone with type 1 adult wise should be supplementing at least 2,000 IUs a day. And if your levels are not optimized, at least 4,000 a day. And if they're really on the low end, you need to be doing like the hyper significant doses of vitamin D for a short period of time.
They give you like, and then 450,000 IUs, and you take one once a week or something.
Like once a week, or I've even seen some doctors do like 10,000 IU a day for, a couple of weeks and then retest. But vitamin D is huge.
And I'm not a doctor, but there's something about vitamin D deficiency and autoimmune that go hand in hand. So just
look at the studies out of Finland.
Right. I tell you, listen, I take 5,000 a day, and I take 5,000 a day of vitamin D. I take a zinc tablet. I take an ascorbic acid with iron, and a B12. And that's what I do every day. And that's what, my kids do and everyone here is doing, because when the D levels drop, again, problems with insulin. I'll tell you right now too, because Jenny mentioned ranges that you need to be in versus what lab values will tell you. Dr. Benito, back on the thyroid thing, said if you are a woman of childbearing years, anything under 70 for your ferritin is too low. And they're not going to tell you you're low till 20. So she's like, if you are having a period, you got to be above 70. And so there's a lot of things. And then all of these things also impact your body's ability to work correctly, which is in part and parcel losing weight or maintaining weight. Yeah.
Right. There was one in here that does go along with medications that I think is a really important question. This woman has a son on a medication that is more for like attention. And it's specific to using it versus not using it, school year versus spring break or summertime, and what ends up happening in terms of insulin needs.
Okay.
And I think it's an important one because I've seen a lot of kids who are using ADD, ADHD kinds of meds. And a very, very common thing with those is that it decreases appetite.
Okay.
And if they're using it in their school day, and they're also, the brain uses carbs. And so the more thinking that's going on and the potential that they're really not hungry, they may not even finish the lunch that you packed for them. They may pick at the lunch that comes from the school lunch because their brain is just saying, I'm not hungry enough to eat.
Okay.
You may end up having to have two types of basal profiles, maybe one for like a spring break, time off, another one for school days. And again, as kids get more into the teen years, that becomes really beneficial in terms of growth and the potential for weight gain in the wrong direction. Because if you're constantly feeding lows again, or constantly adjusting insulin up and down, but it's kind of willy-nilly and not quite right on with need, it's a medication adjustment kind of thing that goes along with adjusting insulin again.
We're right up on it, but there's enough questions in here that all circle around menopause. Do you have any feelings about what happens at that time? And Jenny's like,
that's a fun one.
I'm worried about that for myself in a couple of years.
I mean, in general, menopause in and of itself, I mean, perimenopause really is the start of kind of that time period in a woman's life where your cycles might start to get less evenly spaced, right? Let's say you were the typical like 29 days and you was right on spot. And now like, now it's like 26 days and next month it might be 32 days and that might be 29 days. And, periods can get a little bit more aggressive or kind of look more spotty, but that perimenopause kind of leading into menopause, which is really a woman has not had a cycle in a 12-month time period.
Okay.
Right. So insulin needs can look very jumpy. You might even find that, again, as we get older and these things come into the picture from a female perspective, our metabolism does slow down. We oftentimes start to need a little bit more insulin, or it takes a little bit more activity to maintain or burn off what we were able to do when we were 30. That doesn't work anymore when you're 45 or 50, right? So, I mean, menopause, perimenopause, it brings in a whole circle of hormone impact that may more aggressively change your insulin needs, especially around your cycle times.
So not unlike, I guess more aggressive, but not unlike having your period and seeing hormone fluctuations throughout the month.
Right. And then once you're in menopause, oftentimes, outwards of a year or two post no longer having a cycle, many times then insulin levels should get more stable because you don't have that hormone flux. And as we age, men and women have less and less and less growth hormone cycling anyway. And so we end up, especially women past about the age of 65 or people past about the age of 65, oftentimes their baseline basal needs definitely go down.
Okay.
And the reason there is because their hormone cycling has kind of started dropping off.
Okay. All right. Did we do this justice in an hour? Because I feel like we did, but I don't know much.
I think that we did as much as we could get in an hour. I mean, if we really wanted to focus in, again, dig really deep into that information hole, there's a whole bunch about meds that are very specific to like weight loss and, you know, things like the GLP-1s and things like the SGLT2s, and what, despite them being type 2 meds, they are getting a lot more, they're kind of climbing on the ladder of benefit for those with type 1 and who are just insulin users.
Okay.
And they do have promise in terms of weight management if used the correct way.
Okay. Do you feel comfortable talking about that? Because maybe we'll just say here that if you like this episode, look for that one coming in the future.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Jenny, you were really good.
Great.
You got to do all the talking. I was at some points uncomfortable. I was just like, because of you, I was like, there's not a lot for me to do here. I was just checking.
Just sit back.
I was just saving files and checking rates and looking at questions. I was like,
you're like, I should have just gone and gotten an extra cup of tea.
It's kind of nice. I should have just said, Jenny, tell me about weight loss. I'll be back in an hour. Anyway, you were terrific.
It really is. I was looking at all the questions. I mean, there are a lot of really good questions, but I think a lot of them honestly go back to insulin.
Yeah.
Dosing it the right way for what you're kind of taking in. And then also, secondly, looking at what are you taking in?
Right.
Obviously.
In my mind, these questions they're similar. They're tied together, whether it's vitamins or your thyroid level or your calories or whatever it ends up being, is there is a balance that optimizes your body. It's not going to be the same for everybody. Some people's vitamin D level can be crashy, low to the floor, and they'll never notice it and it won't matter to them. But for some people, it does. And when you get those things in the right balance, then you feel better. And feeling better to me is you feel stronger, you're more rested, like all of this stuff happens, you're clearer in your mind. But some of these things nobody would even know to look into.
No.
You know, even vitamin D, like I can remember 10 years ago, my Arden's nurse practitioner going, we're going to start checking vitamin D. It was almost like a mandate came down from a mountain. You know what I mean? And
actually, I don't even know when that would have been, but if it wasn't, I remember when I was working in DC and the endo practice I worked within, our director was very like high up within the whole like diabetes management, like realm of information. And he was like, we are testing vitamin D levels for every person with diabetes. And at that point, it was really just, the thought was it was relevant more to type 2. Mm. But as we started testing, then I went to my own endo and I was like, I run, I'm outside all the time. I have like brown skin from being outside. I was like, I'm like, I'm sure it's fine. In fact, my vitamin D level came back and my doctor himself called me, not his nurse. He was like, this is really weird. But he's like, I want you to go and get it tested again. He's like, this can't be right. And my level was 18.
Yeah.
18. And so I went and got it tested again. Nope. It was 18 again. He was like, that was the one time a week, the 50,000 IUs. I came back in 8 weeks and it had moved to 21. Mm-hmm. And he was like, So he sent me to see like a naturopath who was also a physician who knew a little bit more in that realm. And she actually started me on oral drops.
Okay.
And the drops get absorbed through your oral mucosa rather than having to go through your gut. Mm-hmm. And because we know there's a lot in terms of gut and absorption in autoimmune disorders, she's like, I guarantee your body's not absorbing it. Yeah. She said, that's the problem. And within about, I think it was 10 weeks after that, I got it retested and was already up in the high 40s.
Yeah. I have to, I thought I was going to have to live getting iron infusions my whole life because I couldn't absorb it through my gut. And I do probably have some like weird stuff going on down there too.
Sure.
And instead I mix it. So first of all, I use a really pure like supplement from a company that, you can do your own research and find one that you like for yourself. But I researched out, found a really pure supplement, and I have to take the iron with an ascorbic acid at the same time.
For absorption.
And when I do that, it absorbs great. If I take just the iron tablet without the ascorbic acid, it won't work.
Yeah.
And that's it. There's a over-the-counter one called Vitron or Vitron D or something like that. It's a iron that comes with, it's C, vitamin C and D together that helps that too. But these are the kinds of things no one's going to tell you about, or they're just going to blurt out, we're testing for vitamin D now. Then you come back quote unquote in range and they don't give you one anyway. And you're like, well, this was a lot of fun. So anyway, everybody balance your body, balance your insulin. Things should get better. That makes sense?
Yes.
All right. Thank you, Jenny.
Yay, you're welcome. Absolutely.
Let me thank Dexcom and Omnipod for sponsoring this episode of the Juicebox Podcast. I'd also, of course, like to thank Jenny. You know, Jenny works for Integrated Diabetes, so if you want to learn more about what she does for a living, you could even hire her. You go to integrateddiabetes.com. I think there's even a link in the show notes to email Jenny, but I don't remember. I haven't looked in a while. You'll find out. Just go root around, see what you can see. Would you like to see if you're eligible for a free 30-day trial of the Omnipod Dash? Go to omnipod.com/juicebox. And of course, to learn more about the Dexcom G6 and to get started, it's dexcom.com/juicebox. There are links in your show notes, links at juiceboxpodcast.com, or you can just type those right into a browser. Since we're at the end and you're still here, let me tell you a little more about the Diabetes Pro Tip series. First, I'm going to read you a couple of reviews, all from Apple Podcasts. This podcast has changed my life. I had a desire to lower my A1C and manage my blood sugars better, but was going at it blindly. Finding this podcast put everything into a tangible and practical management approach that has taken my A1C from 8.3 to 6.3 in less than 6 months. And that's just right now. It's going to keep coming down. Thank you, Scott. I'll be quoting you forever. My son was diagnosed with type 1 about 5 months ago and have learned so much from just the Pro Tip shows and will be listening to all of the episodes. This podcast is amazing both for the information and for the shared experiences from Scott and his guests that make you feel less like you just got hit in the face with a shovel and more like you can find ways of keeping your loved ones happy and healthy. And finally, I saw a mention of this podcast in one of the Dexcom G6 groups on Facebook. The Pro Tip series is filled with such great information. Thank you. For someone who has been living with diabetes for 30 plus years, I wish I had been more proactive in finding the information sooner. I'm going to recommend this to my endocrinologist. So that's a little bit about the Diabetes Pro Tip series and the podcast from other people. You can just subscribe right now on a podcast player. Just hit subscribe if you're there, and you can listen to the podcast every week. 3 new episodes every week. If you don't know how to find a podcast player, there's tons of links to free ones at juiceboxpodcast.com. Or if you want to start with those Diabetes Pro Tip episodes, or in my opinion, I like seeing you start with the Defining Diabetes episodes, which are much shorter and give you a good basis for what all the terminology means and how to use it. All of that information is at diabetesprotip.com. You can get there just by typing that into a browser, or if you go to juiceboxpodcast.com, there are links at the top. One of those links says Diabetes Pro Tip. Start listening. I mean, wouldn't you love to send a review in that says, my A1C went from 8.3 to 6.3 in less than 6 months? It would be amazing. So I hope you keep listening. I hope you enjoy the podcast. Thank you so much for checking out this episode. Please share the podcast with a friend. And don't forget to subscribe. Thank you so much. I'll be back soon with more episodes of the Juicebox Podcast.